Welcome to the Books and Music and News Review Show. Welcome to the Books, Music, and News Review Show. What's going to be today? Books, music, news? Okay, I'm not doing music today, but we're going to do books. I have two good books. One I bought quite a long time ago, and one I got from the library. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go into the control room and take that disclaimer off. And then I'll be right back. So you're going to hear a moment of silence. And that will be for anything you want to be silent about. Used to be a moment. Are How to Let God Solve Your Problems, and it's by one of my favorite authors, Charles Stanley. I didn't know his middle initial is F. It must be for faith. Charles F. Stanley. 12 Keys to Finding Clear Guidance in Life's Trials. And then when you have a problem, there's always lollipops. Okay, let me put this in my bag. Put these in my pocket. And if I talk too much, there's always a lollipop. So the second book, or not necessarily in this order, the first or the second book, is this book, which is a pretty good book. I didn't finish reading it yet. So I'm going to just guess ahead of time that it's a pretty good book. I did read a lot of it. It's called The Art of Inventing Hope. Intimate Conversations with... I was going to ask somebody how to pronounce that. Elie Wiesel. I don't know if that's the way you pronounce it. I used to say Elie. That's how I'm phonic. What can I tell you? Wiesel. I'm going to say Elie Wiesel for now, and if that's the wrong way to say that, you can tell me. It's not because I don't know anything about him. I've read a couple of his books. And let's get on with the book. I'll read you a little bit from the inside cover, and then there's some things that I had read inside the book which really kind of touched me and reached me. In The Art of Inventing Hope. Intimate Conversations with Elie Wiesel. Inside the book cover, let me see what year this was written. I think this was a new book, but I'm not sure. Hold on. Yes, copyrighted 2019. Is a new book. The Art of Inventing Hope offers an unprecedented, in-depth conversation between the world's most revered Holocaust survivor, Elie Wiesel, a son of survivors, Howard Reich. During the last 4 years of Wiesel's life, he met frequently with Reich in New York, Chicago, and Florida, and spoke with him often on the phone to discuss the subject that linked them. Reich's father, Robert Reich, and Wiesel were both liberated from the Buchenwald death camp on April 11th, 1945. So what had started as an interview assignment from the Chicago Tribune quickly evolved into a friendship and a partnership. Reich and Wiesel believed their... Oh no, I came to a word I can't pronounce. It's horrible. Okay, so I'm going to spell it. That's bad. I'm not laughing at the book or the author. I'm laughing at... I didn't think there were any words that I could not pronounce. It's C-O-L-L-O-Q-U-Y. Colloquy? How do you say that? Do you know? Colloquy. Well, I don't know how to pronounce it. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to read this sentence. They believe their colloquy represented a unique exchange between two generations deeply affected by a cataclysmic event. See, I can pronounce big words. It's just not that one I can't. So Wiesel said to Reich, I've never done anything like this before. And after reading the final book, asked him not to change a word. And he's never done anything like that before. Do not change a word of this book. Here, Wiesel, at the end of his life, looks back on his ideas and writings on the Holocaust, synthesizing them in his conversations with Reich. The insights on life and ethics and memory that Wiesel offers and Reich illuminates will not only help the children and the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors understand their painful inheritance, but will benefit everyone, young and old. That's from the back cover of the book called Intimate Conversations with Elie Wiesel, The Art of Inventing Hope. I got a big thing about hope, so that's why I chose this book to talk about. And he starts out, Reich, talking about his own family and a little bit of his background. It's very interesting. And then he goes on, and I want to read some particular things, the chapters that I've read. I'm going to read one chapter and then go back to a chapter prior to that because it's my show and I do what I want to do. So I'm going to do it backwards. I come to this chapter 4 in this book, called We Are All Witnesses. And now I'll go to another topic that's totally not related to the book. We are all witnesses. I tend to talk and blabber about, remember things, and so we are all witnesses. Aside from that, I'm going to get back to the book. But just to make a note of, it was a horrible thing that we found out in the news that the witness to the latest trial, a police officer was sentenced to jail, I think for 10 years. And very shortly after that, I don't remember if it was a couple of days after, the witness, one of the main witnesses in this trial, was shot, was found with, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was, he was shot in the mouth and the chest, I think. But he's dead. The witness is dead. Another names I can't pronounce, Botham John. I think it's Botham John who was the original person who was shot in the safety in the sanctuary of his own home. His witness that came to the trial of the police officer, the witness is dead. And that is what I thought of when I opened this book just now. We are all witnesses. So I'm going to read this from The Art of Inventing Hope, Intimate Conversations with Elie Wiesel. Yeah, it touches me and reaches me. As I considered Wiesel's comments, which you didn't hear because it's in the chapter before this, but I'm going to read this. As I considered Wiesel's comments, I concluded that to him it all came down, in a way, to a single word that he repeated often through our conversations. Witness. Whether we have children or not, whether we are writers or not, whether we are able to publish or not, we, sons and daughters of survivors, are quite literally born to be witnesses to what happens. Even though in most instances, the events we are to witness happened long before we were born. The witness prevails, Wiesel said to me often. I asked him to explain, and this is Reich speaking. I asked him to explain. The role of the witness is actually a religious precept, he said. God says to the Jewish people, you are my witnesses, for I am the Lord. Therefore, my generation is a generation of witnesses. But then I have written, to listen to a witness is to become a witness. Wiesel's religiously infused definition of a witness went far beyond and far deeper than Webster's dictionary description of a person who saw or can give first-hand account of something. To Wiesel, all of us in the second generation are witnesses, and everyone who listens to a survivor or to their children becomes one. Moreover, to be a witness is a sacred duty and a privilege, he was saying. A witness is not merely a passive observer of what happened, but in a way, the eyes and ears of a higher power, according to Wiesel's view. In the case of the children of survivors, we have witnessed close up after effects of the Holocaust, the damage that was done to our parents, the stories they did or did not explicitly tell us, but we've always witnessed the heroism in managing to press on afterward. We are the living, breathing repositories of their life stories inasmuch as we could ascertain or sense their autobiographies. We are the witnesses who convey their tragedies and triumphs to the future, inventing hope. The art of inventing hope. In doing so, we honor their memory, said Wiesel. And I use honor advisedly. There is honor in that, because in the beginning they were all embarrassed to be survivors, as if they had done something wrong. Indeed, there was much shame associated with being a survivor immediately after the Holocaust and long after. Even in Israel, before the trial of Adolf Eichmann in 1961, survivors were considered something close to pariahs. It doesn't seem possible, Wiesel wrote in his first volume memoirs, All Rivers Run to the Sea. But at schools, pupils called their immigrant classmates Sabanum, little soap cakes. This is a macabre reference to the Nazis using parts of dead Jewish bodies for ignoble purposes. Around the world, the survivors often considered pitiful and pitiable. Before Wiesel and others showed humanity how to think of them in another, more aptly heroic light. Continuing this mission is our job as witnesses, Wiesel was saying, and if our parents are still living, we should share what we have witnessed, even with them, especially with them. And he goes on. Being a witness to my family's story comes quite naturally, if very belatedly, to me. For a year after my mother ran out of her house and was diagnosed with PTSD, I began to write and then speak publicly on the subject. Like many of my peers, I was a witness at a vast distance. The world I lived in, modern-day urban America, was about as far removed from my parents' Eastern European origins as was imaginable. And he goes on. So Reich, I think Reich was talking there. And it goes on, and they start talking a little bit about statistics. But this is a pretty interesting book. Okay, so I guess I could go back to the chapter to read before that, since I'm doing this backwards. Chapter 3. I just read part of chapter 4. Welcome to the Books, Music, and News Review Show. We were born into a complex and difficult history, cryptically disclosed in fragments by those survivors who chose to say something to their children, and in silence by those who did not. We witnessed parental behaviors that seemed peculiar at the time, but quite natural in a way, considering the context. In the light of all this, I believe we, sons and daughters of survivors, carry conflicting emotions embedded in Holocaust families and perhaps unfamiliar to those who have not been affected directly by that event. We cannot necessarily even put it into words how we feel about a subject barely articulated in our homes as we were growing up. We may feel responsible for the inadequate, aware yet unaware. As a second-generation friend of mine was put it to me more than once, we knew and we didn't know. What are we, children of survivors, to do with all this? To accept the heritage, which can be a very heavy heritage left by their parents, first of all, said Wiesel. To accept it without giving the parents a guilt feeling and without allowing them to feel that maybe they failed. You know what? Anybody who survived the Holocaust did not fail anything, ever. But he says, so that, I lost my place. Let's get back to that. To accept the heritage. Okay, they failed. Which means to protect their parents' memories, and protect their parents' lives, to protect their parents' dreams, to protect them. He's talking about survivors of the Holocaust. It is a very heavy responsibility. I kind of disagree with that. I don't believe it is the children's responsibility to protect their parents. I always think it's the other way around. It's the parents' responsibility to protect the children. But that's what he says. That's his opinion. I guess we all have our own opinions. Look, they survived the Holocaust. They can survive anything. I don't think they need anybody to protect them. That's just my opinion. Maybe to stand with them, maybe to be with them for something or other, but not to protect them. I think they did a pretty good job themselves if they survived the Holocaust. So, on to the book. But how could anyone live up to such an obligation, he says? How can anyone do justice to this if it has taken the majority of me, it's taken me the majority of my life simply to discern what really was happening in our house more than half a century ago? How could I possibly fulfill this responsibility at this late date? And he goes on. So one thing I'll tell you. If you're depressed or blue or saddened or really in a funk, do not read this book. It is not a cheery book. It will not cheer you up. So if you're feeling fine and you got no problems, read the book. If you're a survivor, maybe. I ain't telling you what to do. I'm sure there are a lot of survivors reading this book. It's a very interesting book. And he goes on. I'm not going to read the whole book, because if I read the whole book, then first off, I don't have time. I've got 11 minutes left. And then you won't get it from the library. Which you should go get it from the library. I'll go buy it. Who's it published by? I don't know. Let's see. Who published this book? Published by Chicago Review Press Incorporated. Wow. It's published in Chicago, Illinois, 2019. Okay, I'll read a little bit more, but not the whole thing. I have to get on to the other book, too. Let's see. What else? I didn't get past chapter 4, so should I read more on chapter 4? I'll read a little. I am surprised not that the survivors leaned to be silent about their stories following the war, that they stayed silent so long. Now, you know what? I'm going to go to an early chapter, because I did read something in here that I said I was going to read. And I took the bookmark out. Let's see. If I can find that, page 31. Did I read that? Be patient with me while I look for this. Okay. My choice came to write my mother's story. This is Reich speaking. He has his mother's story. I did so not as a first option, but as a last resort. It came clear there was nothing more anyone could do for my mother but keep her safe. And he goes on. When people have tremendous trauma, like your mother, they simply never forget, Dr. Rosenberg said. She's in the thrall of old memories and old defenses. Thus, the well-dressed, impeccably that's with the hair, woman who entered the nursing home in 2001 refused to accept any of the new clothes and shoes I bought for her. Eventually, wearing frayed shirts and tattered blouses, she began to look like someone who was on the run, which she indeed believed herself to be. There was nothing left for me to do but write. I'd come late to my parents' story, but because of what happened to my mother, I was catapulted into it. And he goes on. And some of what was written in this book reminded me of something that was written in another book, which was a book ordinarily I wouldn't pick up, but there was a book called Draw Your Weapons. And that book is actually from a dollar store. And I paid a whole $1 for that one. I forget who the author was. But it reminded me of some things in there. And in this book, it was Wiesel or Reich, I forget which one, he said something about the showers, and that in his house, when he grew up, as a child, as he was growing up, even though he was in America, he wasn't allowed to take a shower. Nobody was allowed to take a shower. They didn't tell him why. But I guess as he got older, he saw the significance, what that meant to his parents. They were only allowed to take baths. But, on the topic of memories, when they talk about that those who have trauma will always remember, that's true, but you know what? The trauma doesn't always stay with them. They can get rid of it if they've forgiven the people, and they can actually get it out of their skin. The problem is sometimes if the perps are still around, and that's what causes people who've suffered trauma to still feel like they're in the trauma. The perps are still around if somebody's still coming after them. So you can read the book, Draw Your Weapons. I think this is a much better book, The Art of Inventing Hope. Oh, I have to go to the end, because I did not read the end. And I won't read you the end of it. But there was actually something in here that I wanted to read at the beginning. See, I don't have enough time to read the whole book. It's such a good book. Let's see. Hold on. Patience, we read books, music, and news review. I might just read the afterward. Afterward? Like there's a forward and there's an afterward. Then we bid each other farewell, promising to meet again in New York, and after that we conversed on the telephone. Reich is talking. I was in my home writing one afternoon in 2016, and my phone buzzed, and I learned the awful, to me, unexpected news that Wiesel had died on July 2nd. It just wasn't possible. I instantly recalled an imperishable quote from writer John O'Hara. George Gershwin died on July 11th, 1937, but I don't have to believe it if I don't want to. Neither do I. For Wiesel's words still echo in my ear every day. A little different than if he'd still were sitting here next to me. Get the book, The Art of Inventing Hope, Intimate Conversations with Elie Wiesel, Howard Reich. The other book, How to Let God Solve Your Problems. A lot of times when people hear that, atheists mostly, or people who don't believe in God, they hear things like that, have God solve your problems, or ask God, or God will help you. They get all sarcastic, and sometimes they get a little nasty, and they'll go like, oh yeah, people won't help. It's just like God is the only one that's going to help you. No, that's not what it means. It just means to have your utmost faith and reliance in God. People will help you. God created every person in this world. So, and he does, but you would say, if he has the power to create all these people in this whole big world, does he not have the power to send just the right person to you at just the right time when you need help? Yes, he does. So, How to Let God Solve Your Problems is a very good book by Charles F. Stanley. And I don't have time to read the whole book, of course. We only had 30 minutes in the beginning. But I'll read you the table of contents. We got 4 minutes and 57 seconds. Can good come out of this situation? That's the introduction. Chapter 1, no problem too great. You're right, there's no problem too great for God. He is a wonderful and powerful God. We're talking about Jesus Christ, the God of peace. Chapter 2, the test of endurance. Chapter 3, God has an answer for your need. You know what? I've had a rough life, but God has pretty much been there for me every single moment. Every single moment he's been there. And he has had an answer for my every need. Chapter 4, the faith to stand. Chapter 5, wait for God's timing. Chapter 6, a change in attitudes, solving problems through prayer. Chapter 8, lessons learned from a rebel, God's purpose for adversity. You want to read that, right? How to Find Clear Guidance, Reaching Your Full Potential, and Chapter 12, You Have Always Been Loved. And we have 3 minutes, and I really should put something on the screen there. But remember that, you've always been loved. Wait a minute. Silence and the lollipop break. It's time. Okay, so I'm the only person doing this at the moment, so I'm going to leave that that produced through on the screen there and talk about something else. 3 minutes. I want to read something. Lollipops. I want to read something. This is kind of cool, and I found it on a church bulletin, so I'm going to read it. Lead me in a plain path. I might not have time to finish it. I said, let me walk in the field. And God said, nay, walk in the town. And I said, there are no flowers there. And he said, no flowers, but a crown. I said, but the sky is black, and there's nothing but noise and din. And he wept as he sent me back, there is more. He said, there is sin. I said, but the air is thick, and the fogs are veiling the sun. And he answered, yet souls are sick, and souls in the dark undone. I said, I shall miss the light, and the friends will miss me. They say, he answered me, choose tonight if I am to miss you or they. I pleaded for time to be given. He said, is it hard to decide? It will not seem hard in heaven to have followed the steps of your guide. I cast one look at the fields and then set my face to the town, and he said, my child, do you yield? Will you leave the flowers for the crown? And then into his hand went mine, and into my heart came he, and I walk in a light divine, the path I had feared to see. This was written by George MacDonald, and I kind of like that. I don't usually like poetry, but I kind of like that, because it kind of all makes sense, and it's true. So that's that. I guess we could go back for 1 minute to the book, The Art of Inventing Hope. It's kind of an interesting book. And what I like about the book also, he talks about feelings. And he talks about PTSD, and he talks about a lot of things, witnessing and stuff like that. Many of the feelings and things that happen to survivors of the Holocaust, survivors of slavery and survivors of child abuse and of extreme child abuse can relate to that, because the feelings are the same. They're kind of the same. It's not the same. The Holocaust was a totally different thing. But when someone holds you captive and you're a prisoner, how does one survive the horrors of the Holocaust? Wiesel helps Reich to discover that in the shared memory there is hope. Sheila Nevins wrote that for the back of the book. So I think I'm going to read that. We are airing usually on Saturdays. Oh, time's up. I'll have to go shut that.